The final task in developing any kind of software is getting it into the hands of your end users. In this chapter, I'll show you two of the most popular techniques that you can use to get your website onto the internet: a simple file copy to an IIS web server, and publishing to Microsoft's Windows Azure cloud hosting platform. Before we get started, I've got a bit of a disclaimer. As you follow along with the videos, keep in mind that many web applications have unique deployment needs, and the techniques that we show in this chapter may not directly apply to your exact situation. Instead of seeing this chapter as a how-to guide with detailed steps that you should follow exactly, try to think of it as an overview of the various deployment tools at your disposal, and be on the lookout for the tools and techniques that apply to your situation. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's discuss what it is we're going to be doing at a high level. Generally speaking, there are three kinds of dependencies that most web applications have: the .NET assemblies and various files that contain the logic for the site, any static content that the site relies on, such as CSS or JavaScript files, and any kind of external runtime dependencies that the website requires, such as a database or external services. At a minimum, every ASP.NET web application must include a root bin folder that contains the assemblies with the application's compiled code and other .NET assemblies that the application depends on. As such, the bin folder is a crucial part of any ASP.NET web application deployment strategy. So too, however, are the various other special files that are not necessarily required for the site to function properly, but often contain crucial information such as the site's configuration. These files, such as the web.config and global.asax, almost always must be included in addition to the assemblies in the bin folder. If you're already an ASP.NET Web Forms developer, none of this will come as a surprise to you, since what we have described up to this point is how to deploy any ASP.NET web application. However, ASP.NET MVC web application deployments begin to diverge from those of Web Forms applications when it comes to views. In addition to the application assemblies in the bin folder and any special ASP.NET related files, ASP.NET MVC web applications must also include local copies of all of their views. In other words, everything under the Views folder, along with the rest of the deployed content. This is because ASP.NET MVC evaluates these views at runtime, not at compile time. Next up is the site's static content. The term static content can refer to any type of file, but the majority of these files will almost always be the JavaScript files, CSS style sheets, and images that provide your application's client-side logic and styling. Although these files can technically live anywhere in your site's folder structure, the default ASP.NET MVC project templates create these scripts, images, and content folders for you to place all of your JavaScript files and other content in. Therefore, if you use this out-of-the-box convention, these three folders will contain all of your site's static content. Here's a tip. Be sure to set the build action property on each static content file in your Visual Studio project to Content, so that Visual Studio is aware that it is static content that should be deployed along with your site. Let's talk for a moment about what not to deploy. There are a number of files used in the process of developing a website on your local machine that should not get copied along with the files that I've just mentioned. More specifically, the deployed application should not include any of the source code files that define an application's logic. Since the project is compiled before it is deployed, these source code files are already included in the development in the form of the application's compiled assemblies in the bin directory. With this in mind, you're free to create any folder structure that you please to store and organize your source code files, since these folders will not become part of the deployed application. Though almost every ASP.NET MVC application deployment will include a directory structure similar to the one that we've been following in our demo application, deployment of folders and files is where the similarities between ASP.NET MVC application deployments usually end, and the unique deployment needs begin. Most web applications will also depend on things other than the physical files that get deployed to the server, such as the ability to store and retrieve data from a database, or to interact with a web service. While exploring the details of how to coordinate the deployment of your website with these systems is well beyond the scope of this course, the high-level discussion of how to plan for these kinds of deployments is not. Here's a list of questions you can ask to help discover the dependencies and tasks that your application deployment requires. First, what are the system-level applications and API that the application requires? For example, OS versions, IIS versions, or .NET Framework versions. Does any of this software need to be installed on the server? Second, what are the system-level folders or files that the application requires? Does the application depend on any specific folder path? Third, does the application require a database? If so, have there been any updates to the database schema since it was last released? Also, does the application use a particular database user? And if so, is that user's database access properly configured? Fourth, what other servers or services does the application interact with? And do you need any network changes to access those, such as firewall rules or user or role security? If so, do you need to make any networking changes to access these services, such as setting up firewall rules? And finally, if you're using any third-party libraries, do you have the appropriate licenses for those libraries purchased and available to your application? Note that this list certainly does not include everything that you'll ever need to consider in order to have a successful release. These questions should, however, help address the most common situations and get you thinking about any additional requirements that your particular application may have. In this video, I gave you an overview of the things you'll need to consider as you prepare to deploy your application. In the next few videos, I'll show you how to deploy your application to an IIS or Internet Information Services instance, or to the cloud via Windows Azure.